Crystal Gayle was once known all over the world as country music's golden girl. She became famous not only for her soft, smooth voice but also for her floor-length hair, which turned into her most recognizable feature. Over the years, she sold more than 40 million records and found success on both the country and pop charts, something very few artists were able to do. For decades, her long hair felt like part of her identity. That is why fans were completely shocked in 2022 when she announced a decision that seemed unthinkable. More than 50,000 people signed petitions begging her to stop. When recent photos appeared showing her dramatic change, people could hardly believe it. At 74 years old, Crystal looked very different, and what she chose to do surprised even her most loyal fans. Crystal Gayle was born Brenda Gayle Webb on January 9, 1951, in Paintsville, Kentucky. She was the youngest of 8 children in a family that struggled to make ends meet. Money was always tight, and worry seemed to live in their home. Her father, Melvin Webb, worked long and exhausting hours in the coal mines. By the time Crystal was very young, he was already suffering from black lung disease, a serious illness caused by breathing coal dust for many years. Their small cabin offered very little comfort. Meals were simple, winters were harsh, and life often felt heavy. Even as a small child, Crystal could sense how hard things were for her family. When she was only 4 years old, her father's worsening health forced the family to make a painful decision. Paintsville was a small town with fewer than 3,500 people, and coal mining was the main way families survived. But in 1955, the Webbs packed what little they had and moved to Wabash, Indiana, hoping better hospitals could help her father. The move was difficult. Wabash was larger, with about 10,000 people at the time, but that did not mean life became easier. They lived in a modest area meant for retired miners, carefully watching every dollar. Crystal's mother, Clara, worked wherever she could, starting in restaurants and later becoming a nurse's aide. Almost everything felt strange to Crystal. The mountains she knew were gone, people spoke differently, and the pace of life felt unfamiliar. Indiana families earned about $3,000 a year on average, and the Webbs barely reached that. Even at 4 years old, Crystal could feel the tension in her parents' voices and the fear that followed them after the move. Everything fell apart in 1959. On February 22, Crystal's father died at just 48 years old. She was only 8. His death shattered the family. Her mother suddenly became a single parent raising 8 children, often working 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. Crystal carried her sadness quietly. The stress caused her to develop a nervous habit, and a strict doctor told her she had to stop. Somehow, she did. Looking back, she later said this was one of the first times she realized how strong her willpower was. She felt forced to grow up very fast. Anyone who knew her during those years could see how deeply the loss shaped her. She rarely cried in front of others, but she held all her emotions inside. As she grew older, music slowly became her escape. In 1965, when she was just 14, she joined a band called the Webb Brothers, which included her brother Melvin. She sang backup during school breaks and traveled with them to Nashville. There, she saw the bright lights, late nights, and cramped back rooms that made up the music business. She was surrounded by the world that had already embraced her older sister, Loretta Lynn, who was becoming a huge star. Every time Crystal stepped on stage, she felt the weight of that comparison. Reviewers constantly compared her to Loretta, and for a young girl still figuring out who she was, those comparisons hurt. Still, the trips helped her grow. Her voice became stronger, and her confidence slowly built, even when self-doubt tried to take over. By 1969, Crystal finished high school and wondered what her future would look like. College was an option, but her life changed when Loretta's husband, Doolittle Lynn, offered her a chance to open shows on the road. Touring showed her the hard truth behind the dream of making music. The travel was exhausting, the pay was low, and the pressure never stopped. Even so, each performance pushed her closer to finding her own path. She realized success would not come easily, and the industry was far from gentle, but the stage felt like the only place where she truly belonged. That same year, she had to change her name. Decca Records already had an artist named Brenda Lee, so she needed something new. Loretta came up with the name Crystal after seeing a Crystal hamburger sign, and Gayle came from Crystal's middle name. It felt right immediately. At 18 years old, Brenda Webb became Crystal Gayle. In August 1970, her first single, I've Cried the Blues Right Out of My Eyes, was released. It reached number 23 on the Billboard Country chart, marking the quiet but official start of her career. Crystal kept recording and releasing music. Songs like Wrong Road Again showed her potential, but critics continued to label her as just Loretta Lynn's little sister. Even when her songs performed well, people acted as if she was only following a path her sister had already cleared. Decca Records pushed her to sound more like Loretta, and whenever she tried something different, they steered her back. This frustrated her deeply. Her first album in 1974 sold under 100,000 copies in its first year. That was not a failure, but it was not the big breakthrough she needed either. She had only 2 top 10 singles by then, and every new release felt like the same fight all over again. In 1972, she recorded a duet with Loretta called Me and the Song. It reached number 27 on the country chart, but it made her image problem worse. Industry insiders began to see her as a second version of her sister instead of her own artist. By late 1972, Decca openly debated whether to market her as a copy of Loretta or try something new. Crystal felt trapped. She began to lose her sense of self, and backstage tears became common. Interviews from 1973 described her as quiet and tense, and sometimes she left shows wondering if she even belonged in the music business. She still tried to experiment. In 1973, she recorded Locket Full of Love, which reached number 21 on the charts. The label expected more. When it did not break into the top 20, Decca tightened control even further. Crystal recorded some softer songs with pop influences, but the label rejected them, fearing they were too different. By the end of the year, they were ready to drop her completely. Her career almost ended before it truly began. She continued appearing on television shows, often singing Loretta's songs. Even when she smiled for the camera, she cried afterward. She felt stuck between being a sister and being an artist. Years later, she said those were some of the most painful years of her life. In 1974, she released her final single with Decca, Nobody's Child, which reached number 21. It marked a quiet end to a long struggle. She left the label in December, a risky move in Nashville, where artists who walked away were sometimes blacklisted. Still, she knew she had no choice. Staying would have meant losing herself completely. Crystal Gayle joined United Artists Records in 1974 with cautious hope. Producer Alan Reynolds immediately heard something special in her voice that others had missed. Together, they carefully shaped her sound. Their work paid off with her 1976 album Crystal. When the lead single, I'll Get Over You, reached number 1 in April 1976, everything changed. For the first time, she stepped out of Loretta Lynn's shadow. The smooth, jazzy style surprised Nashville because no other female country artist had taken that sound to the top before. By the end of the year, the album sold more than 500,000 copies. Critics were stunned. Almost overnight, she was no longer just someone's little sister. Her success opened doors not just for her but for the entire genre. She showed that country music could blend with pop without losing its heart. She kept moving forward, and the momentum only grew. In 1977, she released We Must Believe in Magic, an album that produced 4 top 10 singles. One song, however, stood above the rest. Don't It Make My Brown Eyes Blue was released in October 1977 and stayed at number 1 on the country charts for 4 weeks. It climbed to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, something nearly unheard of for a country artist at the time. The album sold over 1 million copies, making her the first female country artist to reach that milestone. Worldwide sales eventually reached 2.5 million. Not everyone celebrated her success. Some traditional country fans were angry, calling her music too pop. newspapers ran dramatic headlines questioning whether country music was dying. The criticism grew louder when the song earned a Grammy nomination, pulling her into a battle between country and pop fans. Even as she became a superstar, the backlash never fully faded. Some radio stations refused to play her music, claiming she had turned her back on her roots. Despite the noise, her career continued to rise. In 1978, Ready for the Times to Get Better reached #1, and she became the first country artist to headline her own HBO concert special. Her floor-length hair became almost as famous as her music, though tabloids sometimes mocked it. All the attention took a toll. During a European tour, she pushed her voice too hard and nearly collapsed from exhaustion. Fame looked glamorous, but behind the scenes, it was draining. That same year, her crossover success reached new heights. Songs like Talking in Your Sleep topped the country charts and performed well on pop radio. By the end of 1978, she had sold more than 5 million records. Television appearances, tours, and magazine covers followed one after another, and people began calling her the Queen of Crossover Country. Her Grammy win in February 1978 should have been a perfect moment. She won Best Female Country Vocal Performance for Don't It Make My Brown Eyes Blue. However, during her acceptance speech, her gown and hair became tangled, and millions of viewers watched her struggle live on television. It became one of the most talked about moments in Grammy history. She laughed about it later, but at the time, she simply smiled and pushed through. By 1979, Crystal Gayle continued to reach new milestones, including hosting her own primetime television special. More than 15 million people watched, proving her lasting appeal. While reports of backstage stress and demanding schedules surfaced, her public image remained strong. She had come a long way from the little girl in a coal miner's family, carrying quiet grief and big dreams. Her journey was filled with struggle, self-doubt, and pressure, but it also showed her strength, resilience, and ability to reinvent herself without losing who she truly was. The next chapter of her career began with a duet that almost never happened. In 1982, Crystal Gayle recorded the song You and I with Eddie Rabbitt for her album True Love. The song later became one of the most popular romantic duets of its time and is still played at weddings decades later. It reached #1 on both the country chart and the adult contemporary chart. It stayed at the top of the country chart for 4 weeks and held the #1 spot on the adult contemporary chart for 6 weeks. What many fans never knew was how tense the recording process was. Crystal and Eddie argued strongly about how their voices should be mixed. Eddie wanted his voice to stand out more during the chorus, while Crystal believed the song needed balance to work properly. The disagreements became so intense that the producer had to step in several times just to keep the session from falling apart. In the end, all that tension somehow turned into magic. When the song was released, it felt effortless and emotional, and it became one of the defining love songs of the entire decade. Around the same time, Crystal's success was creating pressure in places she did not expect. Winning the CMA Female Vocalist of the Year award in both 1977 and 1978 was a huge honor, but it quietly affected her relationship with her sister Loretta Lynn. In a 1980 Rolling Stone interview, Crystal admitted that her rapid rise created some emotional distance between them. They loved each other deeply, but the sudden shift in Crystal's career changed the dynamic. She felt proud of her success but also guilty, knowing how complicated fame could be within a family. It reminded her that winning awards does not just affect the person holding the trophy. It touches everyone close to them. Her career continued to expand in unexpected ways. In 1981, she worked with Tom Waits on the soundtrack for the film One from the Heart. She recorded the project over nearly a year, from late 1980 into 1981. The music blended Tom Waits's rough, raw style with Crystal's smooth and controlled voice. Director Francis Ford Coppola had originally considered Bette Midler for the project, but scheduling issues made that impossible. Tom Waits later said he chose Crystal after hearing her sing Cry Me a River on the radio. The soundtrack received a Golden Globe nomination and was also nominated for an Academy Award for Best Original Score. It was strange, dreamy, and very different from anything she had done before, but people still talk about it because the contrast between their voices created something truly memorable. In 1983, she released the album Cage the Songbird. It reached number 5 on the Billboard Country Albums chart and produced several hits, including The Sound of Goodbye and Turning Away. The title song felt darker than her earlier work. Listeners noticed it immediately. The lyrics hinted at exhaustion, pressure, and emotional strain. Many believe the song reflected her own life, especially the stress of constant touring and the difficulty of balancing marriage with a demanding career. It became one of her most personal albums, revealing a quiet sadness beneath her calm and polished public image. In 1985, Crystal stepped back into Hollywood with a role in the film Tough Guys, appearing alongside Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas. She also performed the song Tough Guys. What was meant to be a light and fun appearance quickly turned uncomfortable. Tabloids began spreading rumors that she was having an affair with Kirk Douglas. There was no evidence, but the gossip spread fast. Crystal denied the rumors repeatedly, yet they followed her throughout the film's promotion. What should have been an enjoyable moment became another lesson in how quickly fame can twist the truth. A major shift came in 1988 when she moved to Capitol Records and released the album Nobody's Angel. It was her first album after leaving MCA. The title track reached number 22 on the Billboard Country Singles chart, but it became her last top 40 hit for some time. The album itself only reached number 63 on the Country Albums chart and sold fewer than 200,000 copies. This was a sharp drop from the massive success she once enjoyed. Critics described the album as overproduced, pointing to its soft blend of jazz and country. Fans felt the change too, noticing that the sound no longer matched the style that first drew them to her. Producer Jim Ed Norman took over during this period, and the shift created distance between Crystal and her longtime audience. Country music was changing, and she was trying to find her place in a landscape that no longer felt familiar. In 1990, she found a brief return to wider attention when her cover of Ain't No Sunshine appeared on the soundtrack for the film 3:10 to Yuma. The song reached number 41 on the adult contemporary chart and reminded listeners of her unique voice. However, behind the scenes, the experience was stressful. Creative disagreements surrounded the recording, and the attention brought more pressure than happiness. It showed how difficult it had become to balance her legacy with the demands of a fast-moving industry. In 1991, she signed with Warner Brothers and released the album Ain't Gonna Worry. The song I Don't Want to Lose Your Love reached number 26 on the country chart. Even so, problems continued. Label politics made touring difficult, and she often had to share the road with lesser-known acts. The energy of her shows changed, and it became harder to maintain momentum. Then, in 1992, things became even more challenging. 2 of her tour buses broke down during a U.S. tour, forcing her to spend large amounts of money on repairs and cancel several shows. The lost income nearly pushed her into serious financial trouble. She had to borrow money and rethink how she wanted to continue in the music business. It was a painful reminder that even established stars can be forced to start over. In 1993, her focus shifted again when she signed with New Vision Records and recorded a gospel album titled Someday. The project followed a health scare involving her voice, and she turned to faith-based music as a form of healing. The album blended gospel with rock elements, surprising many listeners. Some admired her willingness to take risks, while others were unsure about the new direction. The album reached number 63 on the Billboard Christian chart and achieved modest success, showing how difficult it can be to change styles after spending years in one genre. In 1995, Capitol Records attempted to reconnect her with longtime fans by re-releasing a greatest hits album that included a new song called Wild Things. But the music world had changed again. Grunge and alternative rock dominated the airwaves, and country pop crossovers struggled to find space. Crystal later said this period left her feeling lost. The silence that followed weighed heavily on her, and she stepped back from recording for nearly 2 years. In 1999, she surprised everyone with a comeback album titled Heart and Soul, released on the Curb label. The album focused on jazz standards and included her version of Georgia on My Mind. Fans were stunned by how far the sound moved from her country roots. The risk paid off when the album reached number 12 on the Jazz Albums chart. Critics praised her control, warmth, and ability to make classic songs feel fresh. It proved that reinvention was still possible, even after decades in the spotlight. A major milestone came in 2000 when she was finally inducted into the Grand Ole Opry. She performed "Don't It Make My Brown Eyes Blue" during the ceremony. The moment felt emotional and meaningful, like a bridge between her long journey and the recognition she had waited years to receive. Despite complicated family tensions at the time, the night marked a sense of arrival. In 2003, she released the album All the Way, created with help from her son Christos. The album included a cover of "Ribbon of Darkness," which reached number 55 on the country chart. The project blended new songs with familiar standards, showing her steady range as an artist. In 2005, she faced another setback when she needed throat surgery. She was forced to cancel Opry shows and spend months recovering. She openly shared parts of her struggle with fans, and that honesty brought them closer to her. It reminded everyone how fragile even a legendary voice can be. In 2006, she joined Emmylou Harris on the Red Hot and Blue AIDS benefit tour. Together, they performed Cole Porter classics and helped raise over $1 million for HIV and AIDS charities. A short online clip from the tour sparked unfair discussion about her appearance, with people focusing more on her hairstyle than her performance. Still, she remained focused on the cause, and the impact of the fundraiser mattered far more than the noise. In 2019, she released the album You Don't Know Me, honoring songwriter Cindy Walker. Her grandson Elijah took part in the project, making it especially meaningful. The album reached number 10 on the Bluegrass Albums chart. While recording the song Miss Molly, memories of her father surfaced, making the sessions both emotional and healing. Family and music blended together, bringing her journey full circle. Her personal life was filled with both strength and strain. She married Bill Gatzimos in 1971, and together they built a long marriage that balanced public success with private challenges. During the 1980s, legal issues and career pressure tested them, but they worked hard to protect their children, Catherine and Christos, from the spotlight. Behind the bright stage lights, they lived a quieter family life that required trust and resilience. The loss of her sister Loretta Lynn in October 2022 was deeply painful. Crystal paused touring for months and spoke openly about how Loretta had shaped her life, inspired her, and sometimes overshadowed her. Her tribute touched many hearts. The world lost a legend, and she lost a sister. Throughout her life, people speculated about her struggles, but what remained constant was her dedication to her work and her family. She sought therapy in the 1990s to balance fame with motherhood and quietly supported Alzheimer's causes after losing her mother. In later years, she was diagnosed with spasmodic dysphonia, a condition affecting her vocal cords. Even so, at 74, she continues to perform with grace. Her story is one of resilience, reinvention, and quiet strength, and her legacy continues to inspire generations of artists who see in her the courage to keep going no matter how hard the road becomes.